Hi. And how are we going to start this? That's not the one, right?
It's okay.
There we go. The icebreaker slide. How did this happen?
Well, this was probably around 1987 or so, and it's.
Do you need the mic?
Now I forgot my words, but basically, I think these were little pieces I'd make on cardboard, and I always had my body issues and that type of thing. So. I don't know how it happened.
Okay.
Should we go through the images really fast?
Sure, or we can go through as many as you want,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And this is probably like 1991 or so. I was young then, and I had a lot more interest in my misery and focusing on myself. I think I've grown a lot as a person since then, but these are the kind of pieces I was making.
Well, okay, so at the beginning, I mean, I think you really started with a kind of persona. I mean, that you were reflecting yourself, but also, consciously creating a kind of sad sack, loser, whatever.
Yeah, it's hard to say what comes first, because I was doing the stuff and people said, "Oh, it's smart. You're working in this direction," and I was like, "Oh yeah, okay." So I kind of followed their lead. I love encouragement as much as the next person. So, and probably before I was showing, I didn't have a lot of reasons that I was making some of the stuff. I think in some ways I had, my art history rules to challenge me, whatever a picture plane is, or the delicateness of a line, or the flatness of what these things turned out to be. But I think all I could do was say, well, I'm going to focus on myself. I'm not going to speak for other people. And I think the body of work kind of just followed the audience in a way too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, would you say, were you sad, or were you having fun with these things?
No, I wasn't having fun with them, because I think as soon as I made them, it was, and it still is a weird thing to look at this stuff now, because when it's done, it doesn't really, it's not the art I covet. It's the art I make, and I think I've tried to figure out in some ways why. I think when I was this faggy adolescent, I had these dreams of grandeur and the search for beauty, but why my work didn't come out sublime and looking like Cy Twombly or something along those lines, where it ends up having this heavy-handedness to it, is I think still a day of reckoning. It's kind of this. For lack of coming up with a better scenario, since we're sitting in this building, sort of, this Jewish vaudevillian type of thing that might have had hopes of being a brilliant writer, but instead, just kind of doing one-liners. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you feel interested in comedians, and is that something you looked to as a source as much as artists?
I wouldn't say as a source, but I think through osmosis, yes. I mean, I do like that kind of stuff. Once again, it wasn't a specific searching as much as just an evolution, that the work kind of became what it is. I think as we go through some slides, there are other works that I felt I was trying to be smarter with and challenging art movements or that type of thing. But I think these early text pieces were really, I was in my 20s and I had a lot of, blue periods, so to speak. So it was, I think, just a way of making what I could and saying what I had to say. It was all being very honest, and I definitely didn't want to take on the idea of speaking for other people. I was definitely influenced by someone like Barbara Kruger or Jenny Holzer, but I felt they were more the teachers, directing sort of mantras to the audience or giving direction, where mine was really, I'm just kind of rambling in a corner, and if someone wants to pay attention, they can.
And people did. I mean, you had a fair degree of success with this kind of work.
Yeah.
I mean, did that seem...
Surprise, surprise.
Was it a surprise?
Yeah, I think it always is a surprise. I mean, it's a surprise to be invited to come here. It's a surprise that it ever, that it still is going in a way. I still make stuff, and I want to make stuff, and I'm jealous of people who have amazing careers. So, but at the same time, I'm still surprised. I'm surprised I'm as old as I am, and I'm working, and I think it's all still a surprise.
In looking at more collage-based works, what's the process of that? I mean, I know that one thing you're an amazing is thrift store shopper. We have an incredible eye for finding stuff out in the world. How did that stuff happen?
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think the collages were one of those things where I gave myself this very specific rule, which was that I was really only juxtaposing two elements, because I felt when I tried to do collages that had more than that, they became a little too deep and a little too open to, metaphysical, mysteries, and they really weren't about that. There might be a visual drawing process with, just the elements and the lines, and if there's some text in it or that type of thing. But they were really still about an immediate picture. And so the two elements I felt kind of kept it more in the direction of what I wanted, without leaving too much room for interpretation.
Did you find it difficult to literally, we're not looking at images of you here, but did you find it difficult to include yourself, or did you enjoy photographing yourself and doing that nude calendar you did and things like that?
I think there was this obligation that I felt, especially once I was starting to have shows. I felt like I had to push myself into a little bit of an uncomfortable mode. And so the self-portraiture was just an obvious way of putting myself on the line, and kind of at the same time I was also trying to attend the shows I was doing. So I'd either be at the show the whole time to sell the multiples, or well, yeah, that's basically all I did. I mean, it wasn't performance as much as it was kind of literally saying, you know, here I am, you know, how much more can I do? But
I mean, were you a salesperson in a certain way? I mean, I know there's the time that you served cookies and milk or something.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of just, again, added value in a certain sense to the work you're doing.
Yeah. I think in some ways earlier on I tried to give away things, and that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth because, well, you know, I'd see them in the trash outside of the gallery or whatever, and I thought, well, you know, I don't want people to feel like they have to take them. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, you know, it's like, you know, I don't want someone to take me somewhere I don't want to go, and I don't want to take someone where they don't want to go. So it felt like if I charged money, then it wasn't so much the money as it was someone was making sort of an effort, and I was making my effort, and we were coming to a meeting point. Sometimes it would just be little cards that I think, like in the Bad Girl show at the New Museum, I was selling drink tickets, and
real ones.
Well, they were real. I made them, but there wasn't any drinks for sale. Which, but you know, they were 10 cents. Uh-huh. So, you know, and I would sign it and make it very official. And you know, it was the early '90s, and there was this, I guess, as there always is, this PC-ness thing going on. So, I would get some angry people who would be like, well, where are the drinks? You know, they actually thought they were buying drinks, or they wanted to know where the money for the project was going. And it's like, well, you know, it cost me about $200 to print the cards, and charging me 10 cents. So it was that kind of stuff that I just kept trying to avoid certain situations. So, you know, certain things would change as projects evolved. But, yeah, it was just this idea of trying to befriend the audience.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about the notion of whatever kind of agreement or connection that can be forged by having to pay money. I know that Pamela Lee talked about how in the, I guess, 2 Venice Biennales, the Felix Gonzalez Torres piece, everybody, the garbage cans outside the American Pavilion were filled with the posters, apparently, that kind of thing. But he was actually forging that kind of giveaway strategy at that time. Was that something you were looking at?
No, I was probably a bit jealous, but I wasn't looking at it. I mean, I mean, there are artists that I feel like, oh, they beat me to it, or you know, something. But no, I think because his also had this layer of importance that I really wasn't trying to achieve. You know, sort of the sobriety of his installations were just so different than what I was doing that it wasn't there wasn't like a nemesis issue going on. But
I mean, who at that time do you feel like you were in a dialogue with, whether literally or, I mean?
Well, you know, Rob Pruitt and Jack Early were Pruitt Early then, and they were doing some similar things. There was something I really liked about Robert Gober's making everyday objects. I mean, they were very different in that they weren't multiples, but I always loved his installations. I mean, for me, a bit earlier on was Jonathan Borofsky, who I still think is great, and so he was a huge influence on me. I remember in the mid to early '80s, he had a retrospective at the Whitney, and there was stuff all over the floor, and people were playing ping pong, and I just thought it was also welcoming, and it was more or less encouraging everyone. I think every viewer just felt encouraged. I think every viewer felt like they had a pat on the shoulder, like, you've come here, good for you, help celebrate, that kind of thing. So I think his work was really one of those big moments for me. Yeah.
Let's see what else we got here. I think you talked about the notion of PCness, and looking at this particular piece makes me, I don't know what year it was, but it makes me think about Sarah Silverman as a comedian. I mean, it's really sort of pushing it in the same way that she does. No.
Well, maybe. I think I also, these, believe it or not, were kind of a little bit about painting, in that I wanted the viewer to kind of look at the entire painting, and so if it was a poem, nobody stops in the middle, So it was kind of a A to Z sort of filling up the whole picture plane. So they were always, these kind of silly rhyming things, but it was a little about making a painting. I didn't do them on multiples. The rhymes were really just on paintings.
Same for this one.
No, this was just sort of feeling sorry for myself. So.
Did anybody buy that painting?
I don't think so, but I probably made about 10 of them. No one bought that painting either.
This one I would say is
or
kind
that
of
painting.
Really? This just seems like a classic of yours.
It's in my basement.
Okay, so here we get, and this to me speaks to that kind of graciousness that I was talking about earlier, and the just kind of abundance of things. So you would be in this environment, kind of hawking your wares?
Yeah, I'd have a table with multiples on it, and back then I think I was also just so sort of, once again grateful that I was showing, and I didn't really want to reuse material. So for every show, I wanted to make a whole new show, so of course I was working really hard and kind of pumping things out in a way. But there was this idea that for some reason I really felt this obligation to just sort of cover all bases, like, oh, somebody might like collages, somebody might like painting, somebody likes this. I wanted to make sure I had everything in a show. So this was kind of one of my first attempts at making a smart show. And, so it was the first time I did a show without any text. It was the mid-'90s, and Clinton was president, and Hillary Clinton was trying to push through health care, and Newt Gingrich was really, just being awful. And around that time, I had seen this documentary and where Eleanor Roosevelt was criticized for serving franks and beans when the Duke and Duchess of Windsor came to the White House. So I decided to, I thought, wouldn't it be great to have this kind of grandmother figure? Everyone loves Eleanor Roosevelt. It would be great. So I did this show sort of with all hot dogs as sort of a tribute to Eleanor Roosevelt. And, they have that kind of Richard Tuttle-esque thing going on. And but the gallery space was really big. So those are all cut pieces of wood. But then that red thing off to the side was 100-foot red hot because it was just painted on the wall. And I had brandy snifters, so they were cocktail weenie snifters, and yarmulkes that were brown with yellow and red for mustard and ketchup, and so they were kosher hot dogs. And
How did it go over?
the funny thing is, it didn't do much at the time. I was kind of, happy with my achievement of doing something without my usual text. So for me, and I was happy with the work, so it was fine. About maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years later, Microsoft bought a whole bunch of the hot dog paintings that I think they have in some cafeteria somewhere. But
Bill Gates likes hot dogs,
yeah,
apparently.
who could blame him? So.
Yeah. So yeah, it seems like there's, you really, and maybe out of that idea of trying to please, let's say, working with all kinds of different materials, this being another, unusual example of something.
Yeah, so this is just basically like a found multiple. It's those, I think I got this in Germany where they have a sign for everything. So it was, just a really fun shop to go into and sort of do these double entendres with signage. So
We were talking a little bit about notions of pricing and how that, I think, has been pretty important for you in terms of, what you charge for this. You started to talk about that in terms of, one, not giving them away, but creating some kind of bond with people. But how do you end up pricing your work, and what does it mean beyond that stuff?
Well, it's still something I really haven't figured out. But obviously, if there's an idea and I see how much it's going to cost to make, then I have to figure out a lot of issues about it. Like the last show I had was all coffee mugs. Well, there were some wine glasses and highball glasses too, but basically, at first I didn't want to have a show, and then of course I didn't want to turn down the opportunity of having a show. So I thought really hard, and I thought it'd be really nice to do this show that these objects would literally be put on a pedestal. And at first the gallery wanted to put some paintings on the wall, and I said, well, even if I just put one, little painting on the wall, suddenly the focus becomes the painting, and all the mugs become secondary. So there was nothing in the show except these objects, and there was the idea of, some were espresso cups, so they're small, and then I found these 30-ounce cups, so of course they were really big, and certain things cost more, and I suddenly had to have metallic gold ink on something, so the pricing was really literally based on how much it really cost to get that done. Not that, the espresso cup is any less interesting to me than the 30-ouncer. It's just that there's this sort of certain things cost more. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of the mugs were really easy to make because they're really basic 11-ounce mugs. So in the end, I think I divided up sort of a few high-end pieces, and then everything else was kind of the same price. And then there was sort of like a 30% discount if you bought the entire show. So it's really kind of, my goal wasn't to make money. Luckily I have a job and I like my job and it gives me the freedom to do something like this. But I didn't really want to lose money out of, just out of self-esteem. And also because the gallery didn't want to front any money, when you cut the 50% cut in half, half of, or depending on which piece it is, was coming out of my half. So it was, is really just kind of boring.
Well, the structures are very different than, say, the added value of the artistic gesture is, you're not sort of figuring that in a certain way. You're applying a kind of standard retail thing. So what, did they sell a mug for $15.95? The split is $7.50 something each.
I have to say that sometimes out of bitterness, as multiples get older, I raise the price because, I'm sitting with, 100 of them in a box forever, and I just, if nothing else, it's kind of like I'm really challenging people to take them off my hands at this point. But, when they're brand new, the idea is like, let's just all be in it together. And then, I've had these, especially now that there are all these hoarding shows on TV. There's a part of me that's just like, I know I have a problem, and I really just want to get rid of this stuff. But at the same time, I want to say, well, it's my retirement fund too. I've got to hold on to this. But the value for now, I think I would like people to buy the piece and interpret it as a standard piece of art, as they would anything else they have, and that would be really pleasurable for me. And it's just, once again, more about the interaction. I'm not in this category where I have to worry about a market or a price level or supporting myself off of the work. So
let's see what's next on here. But at the same time, and I know you don't sort of view this as being part of your art practice, but the fact that you are a print specialist at an auction house means that you're very well versed in terms of the art market. And I can't help but really view this as a commentary on that. Do you view it that way as well? Do you strategize it?
No, I was making the multiples before I had the job, so.
So that was training in a way.
Well, I got into the job through collecting, and because I was collecting and trading up, and having to sell something to pay for something else, kind of thing. So to me, they're sort of just what they are. They're kind of just these issues, but I just don't think about it too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at what we have here, I think early on, sort of entering into queer dialogues about work, or in a kind of art world where that was a kind of issue that is quite different now. I think both one, notions of commodities, but two, notions of sort of queer identity have shifted. I don't know. Could you see making this kind of work now? Or what's changed in that regard?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I was, I guess, bringing up some chips on my shoulder, but for some of this kind of stuff I was making back then, the Go Fags pennants and stuff like that, there was, a group of gay men who were not happy that I was making these things, and they weren't very nice to me. They
what did they do? What did they say?
Well, just they were probably no different than a lot of other art world negativity, but they felt that this was not the way for gay progress. The last thing they wanted was, some fashion victim sad sap who was making, this kind of stuff. So it was this kind of thing that kind of intimidated me in a way, and so I was hypersensitive to just speaking for myself in a way. Nowadays, sometimes I feel an obligation that the piece should have an issue. I think because I just come out of that generation of political awareness. So there are some multiples that I've made recently that will have certain issues. The gay thing is not prevalent, I think, because of maybe where I'm at or what I perceive things are doing. But I'll have sort of just still an honest dialogue with what's going on. So, I'll have a mug that says, I love my boyfriend very much, he's very patient, or that kind of thing. So there's still trying to keep an open dialogue about what I'm thinking about. But maybe it's just a weakness on my part, but I haven't been dealing with AIDS or
gay marriage.
Or I think gay marriage, probably out of my own neuroses, kind of confuses me. Just for I'm in a really nice relationship, and I think because I never grew up thinking I would get married, I still don't really know how to deal with it. And when I read the marriage announcements in the New York Times and these people are in their 20s getting married, I'm like, oh my God, they're too young to get married, So it's one of those things that I don't have anything smart or something to add to the conversation at this point. So.
Okay, let's see what else we got here. Stop me if there's something you want to...
this is one of those. One. This was I made a few years ago. It's the Cindy Sheehan megaphones, and then her son Casey's name is kind of the letters are in between Cindy's. So it was kind of for me at the time. It was very moving to watch her sort of movement take place, and. I think it was my way of dealing with the war. So. Mm-hmm.
Did she get one? Did you send one to her?
No. I don't know. I don't know her, and I wouldn't want her to think some crazy person is watching her or something. So. So this is, I call it a puffy print because they're puffy. Mm-hmm, and but they're just current art related things,
right?
So,
right.
And
are you still part of that fan club?
Oh yeah.
There's a lot. That's hard one to say.
That's from I think the late '90s. Is Liza Minnelli for President rain ponchos. I made them in all the colors of the rainbow flag at the time. So. And then I had a show that was kind of half devoted to Andy Warhol piss paintings.
I mean, it's interesting also to see the kinds of things that could be customized. It's almost as though technology or kind of entrepreneurship is sort of allowing for you to do a lot of newer
it's
items.
It's a little bit of a challenge because I try not to get carried away. So I try and still do simple things. For me, they're just more appealing. I mean, I'm seduced by a lot of trickery, but in the end, just some really banal thing sitting there is my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think here we're heading into the Jewish section.
Oh, yeah. So this was a show at the Jewish Museum in Philadelphia, and this was kind of a nice challenge for me. I was invited to do a show there, and I've always had this Americano fetish. I collect a lot of Americana sort of things, and I think one of my issues when I was growing up was just feeling sort of like this chubby, unattractive Jewish kid in a fairly typical Connecticut town. So assimilation, I think, was always one of my challenges. So this show, I have the clipper ship paintings, and so they're modified clipper ship paintings, modern and up to date. But this idea that a clipper ship painting passes, if you are, if you have a library or you want to hang a painting that doesn't say anything about you, a clipper ship painting might fit the bill. Not making any comments on maritime collectors, but it is a more passing art form. And but I painted the little plaques into the imagery of each. So it says, like painted by Cary Leibowitz, exhibited at the Philadelphia Museum of Jewish Art. So there were all these things that kind of gave it away. So it was no longer a passing painting. So I had the clipper ship paintings, and then I had no, that's not it. Ski hats that were one group of ski hats made an American flag on one side, so they were red, white, and blue, and they said Shalom Slalom, and then a big Jewish star made of ski hats that were Happy Hanukkah, and then yarmulkes that cut cracks in, so they were Liberty Bell yarmulkes.
Okay.
So
the yarmulke section. Where is it?
No, I don't think they're in there. But
Or we have.
Yeah.
I like that, the sort of way you could sort of work the themes.
But yeah, I was really happy with the Philadelphia sort of challenge.
You want to identify these yarmulkes?
Yeah, so I think, like, as you might have already gotten sick of the word mug, I'm in my mug phase now, but I was in a yarmulke phase for a couple of years, so I would always make a yarmulke multiple. So there was the one for Germany, which is the color of the flag of Germany, and then inside it said, thanks for remembering. And then for a show in Sweden, there was the color of the flag of Sweden, and it said, please don't forget Raoul Wallenberg. And then on Stonewall's 25th anniversary, there was the hot pink, white and blue yarmulke. And
there's the hot dog one.
Yeah, and then it's the kosher hot dog, which kind of looks a little like Germany, but it was the Eleanor Roosevelt one.
And then there's this one, which
Yeah, so these were a bit earlier. So they were Chanel yarmulkes, which was maybe very early 90s in a way. And it was, it just kind of playing with fashion. At the time, there was just other Chanel stuff too. So then this was, it's my bar mitzvah picture on those trash cans, and that was maybe about 6 years ago or so. And I had always wanted to make a trash can and never got around to it, so I was really happy I finally did. And I had asked my mother to send me my bar mitzvah pictures, and then I don't think I even saw those pictures even back then. So it was a little revolting looking at it, but then the text is gain weight now, which weight, I did the WAIT because at the time I think I had, an hourly mantra that I was going to, survive adolescence and leave Connecticut and start a fabulous life. So it was all about waiting and my weight. And so
I'm intrigued. I don't know the work that's in the background in this image, and you don't have any images in here. What is that?
They were kind of my concrete poetry sort of paintings. They were a little bit, they were really very much explaining what my paintings were about then, which was nothing. I didn't have anything to really say or do, so the paintings became these just physical plays off of those ideas. So like that purple one is, painting with something missing, or the blue paintings in the back, one painting has a doorknob on it and one doesn't, so it's painting with a way out and painting with no way out. Or there was when I cut an X out, so there was painting with no perspective. And I think the one with the horizontal bands might have been, I don't remember now, but maybe like reading between the lines. I'm not sure. I don't even think it was reading between the lines, because that doesn't make sense. But they all had to do with what the paintings were lacking. There was one, with a heart cut out, is painting with no soul. So it was all just really like, okay, I'm making these paintings, and they were all the same size, and they all had their paintings, their titles painted on them. So they were very formal, and they were, I guess, a little bit about being lackluster and brain dead, and
Okay, I think let me try to move through some stuff here.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
So that's yeah.
Okay, and then here I wanted to at least talk. I know again, this is not something you view as part of your practice, but this is a picture of Cary's house in Harlem that was on the cover of the New York Times Magazine, and yeah, I think it speaks, one, to part of your collector aspect, but also the kind of sense of design that's incredibly quirky.
Yeah, well...
as well as the interest in presidents,
yeah.
Americana.
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff, I bought over the years, and... the fabric, bought at a flea market once. It was the patches that were never cut off their bolts, and had that. And I mean, the great part about getting in the magazines, it sort of justifies and qualifies shopping and looking at things. Like, oh, it's not just a waste of time. I was looking at decorating magazines since I was like 6 years old, so it's a true guilty pleasure, with that Nelson Mandela sofa, I found the fabric once, and then when I was having the sofa made, I also had a suit made to match. So,
for an occasion?
Well, not yet, but I've only had that sofa now about 12 years, so. The occasion still might happen. I mean, I have stacks and stacks of fabrics that, I always have these ideas that, oh, I'm going to do something with this stuff. I mean, I appreciate a lot of things and hope to someday use a lot of it. But
okay, so
yeah.
that's a kitchen. So we get a sneak peek at, actually has the second house that I just think this is amazing. You had done a series of I Love paintings, and one of them was I Love Robert Venturi.
Yeah.
And you were able to connect
well,
with him.
It's sort of it is a miracle house, and I have to say that I still really have to like slap myself to remind myself not to be a spoiled brat, because Robert Venturi was always one of my heroes. I started when I started college originally. I thought I wanted to be an architect, and I didn't know anything about Robert Venturi at the time. I didn't know the name even. My interest was really in sort of this just pre-World War I neoclassicism in a way, and suburban houses and all of that. I think it all just still comes out of my growing up. But as soon as I started school, architecture school, there were a lot of things I really didn't like about it, and I quickly felt that it wasn't for me. But one person that I came across was Robert Venturi, and obviously, and then Denise Scott Brown, who's more involved with urban planning, but there was something very much about Robert Venturi's way of accepting things, like that, there are different cultures and there are different phenomenons and different styles and different things going on, and there's a lot to be learned and embrace. And also, he coined the term ugly and ordinary, and his reaction to less is more, less is a bore, and all of those things were such a just something I really needed to hear and made a lot of sense to me. So at one point in time, I don't know what it was exactly that I actually felt I had the right to write to him and ask if he would, well, my boyfriend and I were living together, and he likes the place, but he moved into the place that you just saw the images of. So it was one of those things where there had to be a weekend place. So Simon, my boyfriend, was open to the idea. He wasn't that knowledgeable about architecture or anything. It wasn't his thing. But we, I wrote to Venturi. We didn't know if we would build a place or add on or whatever. We were just starting the whole idea. And I wrote to Venturi, and I, just tried to say how important and influential he was to me, and if by some chance he would be open to doing something. And it was a really nice surprise. I think it was great timing. He was at a point in his career where he had the time or was interested enough, and so we originally went to Philadelphia and met him and Denise, and they drove us around, and all they were trying to do was talk us out of doing something. They were like, well, you should buy an old house and just, do something to it. I was like, well, this is what we already live in, And then they were like, well, you should buy an old factory and do something to it. I was like, no. I think they were just kind of challenging this idea. And then we started working on different ideas. So, I learned a lot of issues from going through this process, and the house was really just done around Thanksgiving.
But the next one, which I think this is amazing.
So this is more the front, and he deals with symbol and signage, and so that chinoiserie sort of facade is just like highway signage. Thin aluminum on a steel structure, and it's about 5 feet away from the house. Well, there are a lot of amazing things about it that you don't see in these pictures, but there's a big room behind it. Basically, we had originally I said because we found this old house that we liked, so we're like, well, would you add on something? And he's like, well, what do you want added on? I was like, well, you could do whatever you want, but don't, whatever you want to do. And he's like, no, you have to give us a program. And so we kind of came up with a program that we needed a room, and we kind of went from there.
Is that the interior?
Yeah, so that's the room, not officially decorated yet, but you see that there's the neon sort of mannerist arches that are hanging from the ceiling, and then the patterned floor. And I'd been collecting Venturi furniture over the years, so that's a lot of Venturi furniture in there too. And so I think what's nice about it too is that he's in his 80s, but every immediate decision he had throughout the process was totally right, and it's really great to kind of deal with somebody who you just inherently trust that their way of thinking is right, Mm-hmm. And sometimes I would get nervous. I'd be like, well, but shouldn't we do something here? And he'd be like, nah, keep it dumb, And I'd be like, oh yeah, okay. And everything's great. So.
Okay. For the sake of time, we'll run through some of the mugs, and then we can talk about the one here and segue into the next phase of things.
Yeah, so these are some of these mugs from that last mug show. A lot of them had to do with George Washington, like George Washington redecorates Mount Vernon, or Bette Midler crossing the Delaware, or Liza Minnelli lands on the moon, or Judy and Liza fly to the moon. So there's, I think there are artists who do a more sarcastic sort of play off of American figures, and I've kind of, once again, just stayed away from that. And sometimes I feel like I'm one of these sort of naive loyalists in a way, but I still just try and stay on, something that I'm interested in and focus with in a positive way.
Okay, so I don't know if any of you've seen the what you can purchase in a few minutes, but here's side one, and I guess it's sort of a seasonal one as well for side two,
Yeah.
which I particularly
And
enjoy.
it's a 20-ouncer.
So yeah, do you want to just sort of give us a little background into how you came up with this particular item?
Well, it's a word that you guys are already sick of me repeating myself over and over, but basically Glen came to meet with me in New York, I don't know, was it like 6 months
October,
ago?
yeah.
So, and it was one of those things where sometimes I know somebody might be into doing something sort of Jewish, but at the same time, I'll say, "Oh, do you want to meet at Katz's Deli for a meal?" And it's a fine line. Sometimes people are like, "Ooh, I don't really want to go." Like I don't eat, fatty meat or that kind of thing. And so I a lot of the times I don't suggest it, but I suggested it to Glen, but I was still a bit worried that when we got there he'd be grossed out or just pick at his food as I'm like chowing down. And so
I loved it.
So I was kind of glad that and then he had a friend stop by, and then this guy didn't look like he'd be into eating a pastrami sandwich, but he was. So I was kind of like, like go pastrami. So and then also I was talking to Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown a few weeks before Christmas, and I asked them what they were going to do for the holidays, and they said, "Oh, well, we go to this kosher deli in Philadelphia and have gefilte fish." So when we were making a holiday card to send to them, I wrote inside "Viva gefilte fish" because Bob does "Viva," "Viva Las Vegas" or "Viva Michelangelo" or that kind of. He uses the word "Viva" a lot. So it was just this kind of timing of. That it's just very current for me.
Great.
Yeah.
Questions?
I think this is on. It'll be on in a moment. Well, first of all, thank you very much for unpacking all that for us. And we do have time for some questions, and if you can speak in the microphone, that would be great. So if I see a hand, I will come find you. Or.
Cary, you seem to be ambivalent about making art, but like completely into decorating, and yet like they both look like art. Like, what's the difference in the two activities for you?
Well, decorating for me, I'm really using other people's things. It's stuff I find or stuff I appreciate. So it's fabric or furniture or wallpaper or whatever it is. It's more. I have to answer some ideas, but it is a very different process than when I make stuff. I really kind of justify it. You know, I mean, it all looks very flip, and I know I don't want to sound like Ellsworth Kelly when he talks about how hard it is to come up with a color, but it does, you know, I do edit a lot. I mean, it looks like I'm sitting and watching TV, but I'm kind of editing, and even the flip things are not so flip, you know, they're sort of edited, and it looks like I make a lot of stuff, but in the scheme of things, I don't really make a lot of stuff, and I think I have my bursts of energy, or, you know, like suddenly, you know, the mug show, so 15 different, you know, at first I'm going to make 8 mugs, and then it's like, oh no, now I have 12 mugs I want to make, and then there are 15 things I want to make. So, you know, it's a process, where with decorating, it's sort of like editing big piles and making balancing acts and decorating. So, I don't know, it feels very different to me.
Yeah, have you exhibited your work, or have you presented your work outside of the gallery context? For example, have you considered collaborating with cafes for the mugs, or that kind of, like, any store interactions?
I haven't, mostly because I wasn't invited, but yeah, I mean, when I like a lot of those kind of ideas, and I'm totally open to it, and I haven't thought about it too much, because a long time ago I decided not to initiate anything, because it's a really disappointing process. So you know, once the thing happens, then I try and take my inspiration or go with it. I don't have too many things that I like sit on waiting for a show. It's more, if something comes up, then I try and work with that. But I haven't really ever, I mean, it was like one of those things of Felix Gonzalez Torres was doing billboard projects and things like that. And I just didn't really feel comfortable even going after that kind of stuff. I always felt my stuff was more handheld and the small picture, or dealing with the unimportant, as opposed to hitting people over the head. I don't mean that in a nasty way, but I just wasn't really looking for this huge attack process. But yeah, like if, you know, a cafe or a store kind of thing would be great. I mean, a lot of times I see what certain stores do, and I'm kind of jealous that the projects, well, took place in a commercial environment, but also that someone had sort of the opportunity to work with that medium in that process. So.
But is this a unique situation in terms of doing something for the store here?
Yeah, well, I've tried to incorporate those things. I mean, it's probably a bit of a selfishness on my part, but anytime I go to a museum, I always check out what's in the gift shop. And so when I was invited to do this project, or this talk, I felt like there needed to be sort of a tangible half to it.
And do you want to talk about, in a general sense, that how many are made and how you come up with the edition size, let's say?
Yeah, well, I mean, in this case, I made 72 because that was the minimum order for the this size mug, and I don't know why I was adamant about doing a 20-ounce mug, but I was. For some reason, I just didn't want to do the standard size mug, and it is all esoteric, but But in the end, I like to think there is a reason. So.
Hi, I have two questions. My first one is, a lot of your work seems to flirt with like bad taste, and that always brings up issues of class to me. And I guess I would ask like how you deal with issues of like artists slumming it. And then the second question is, if you could do a Louis Vuitton window or like a Target line of goods, which one would you do?
Well, the first one, the first question, I have to say that it's not bad taste. I don't really think of it as bad taste, and if it is bad taste, it's bad taste in a good way, which isn't necessarily offensive or what I consider unattractive. So it's in that sense, it's not about those issues at all. I mean, I think they look the way they do because I like these really basic processes. But I have to say that I was there on the 14th that day. The Liberty line was coming out at Target, so I made a special trip, and I'm totally jealous of the people at Target that get to come up with these ideas, which I thought was great. And even though I liked Murakami's installation of the shops in his traveling retrospective, I was also what I liked was just the whole surreal aspect of it. I liked going into them, but there was nothing in it that I coveted. I didn't like the stuff in there. I think I used to have a fake Murakami watch, Louis Vuitton watch that I bought on Canal Street that I liked a lot. It fell apart, but basically, I think his kind of art is going in a different direction than mine. And I wouldn't rule out Louis Vuitton for myself, but I was very excited and much more jealous of the Target process of working with Liberty, and I see these things. I mean, I used to have these sort of fantasies of like having ICAs built on top of supermarkets and strip malls. You already have the parking lot, and you already have people going there, and you just need an escalator to go up to a second floor. I think it's not so much about high-low as it is about availability and accessibility. I think what I've found through my job over the years was a lot of people buy bad art because it's what it's available, and then so somebody will call me and say, oh, I bought this print, and I don't know what their question is, but basically somehow they want my advice or my thoughts on some awful print that they really paid too much for, and it's because they went into the first gallery they've ever been in, which wasn't a very interesting gallery, and bought the first print that was sort of affordable to them, and it wasn't really a very interesting piece of art. And so I think accessibility and availability and all of that breeds knowledge, I think, and just people get a sense of things when they live with it. So I don't know where I was going with that, but basically the high-low factor for me is sort of a moot point. For me, it's all the same, or there's an equal balance, but it's not a commentary, and I wouldn't like to think that I'm slumming it. I kind of would like to think that I had the courage to go there.
We have maybe time for one more question before we move our conversation to the store.
This this is just really simple, but could you talk about how you came into your position at Phillips, like how that kind of evolved, and if it's changed your work?
Yeah. Well, it hasn't really changed my work, but I mean, this whole career, it kind of came about through sort of my interest in collecting. When I was, I grew up in the suburbs of New York, and I think I had a very typical sort of jaded perspective on, the best museums are in New York and everything's in New York and New York centric and whatever. And of course I grew to hate New York, and I had this fascination with going to the Midwest. So I went to the University of Kansas, and on that campus there was a beautiful little museum that had a really great collection that was started in the late 19th century. And it was really eye-opening for me to see that these pieces of art that were really quite interesting pieces, maybe not the huge masterpieces that you'd see at the Met or wherever, but really interesting examples of artists' work. And because there's a teaching museum juxtaposed in a different way. This collection was built over the years through donations or different directors that had different visions, but it was the first time that I even thought of the idea of collecting, like the act of collecting, or that people collected art. And but it really got me into it. I started writing to galleries, it was way back when, so I'd write to a gallery and ask them if they had anything by this artist, in a price range. And some galleries never wrote back, and some were really quite encouraging and say, oh, you could pay it off over time, and they'd send me slides and that kind of thing. So I started collecting, and then I graduated, and I moved to Boston, and I was working in a frame shop, but I was, searching out art and meeting different print dealers or whatever, and finding things, and I'd start buying and selling to pay for my acquisitions, and eventually different dealers offered me jobs, and it kind of just snowballed into a career. But it was really through this the Spencer Museum on campus, and just something that I was obsessively interested in turned out to be sort of a good job for me. Yeah, it was a photograph by Doug and Mike Starn. It was kind of a double gargoyle. I still have it. The second piece was an after Stuart Davis watercolor by Cary Leibowitz, but I had to sell that at one point. Those were the first two. The after Cary Leibowitz, I was really into, both of these artists I had only known through reading about them in magazines and reading articles on them. So it was, and then I'd get slides, and I'd buy it, and then it would be shipped to me. And it was, the Starn piece was really interesting because it had all the things, the aspects of it I was expecting. When the Cary Leibowitz came, I have to admit that it was almost like a Venturi moment too, because it was like this very basic little watercolor on a piece of paper that was, this reproduction of a Stuart Davis image done in black and white, because that was the size of the illustration she was working from. And I had to remind myself that that's the act of making this piece was what the piece was really about. But my first thing when I opened the package, I wanted this grandiose, major, important thing, and then I had this little thing that looked like a thrift store painting, and I was like, oh yeah, but that's what it is, and it was a little lesson.